Hi, everyone, and welcome to another WHO live question and answer session. I see a lot of you have joined already with the olas and the hi's in the chat, people from Iran, Uganda, Ukraine, Indonesia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and many other places. So glad you're with us. Guess what? Today is World Food Safety Day. Everyone eats, so everyone should be interested in this topic. And we have with us an expert from WHO to speak about that. We have Dr. Simone Morai Razel. She's a food safety expert. She's been working in this domain for over 25 years, and she can answer all your questions from the most simple, everyday, to the more technical and complex. Welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Nika, and thanks everyone who's joining the session with us today, and happy World Food Safety Day to everyone.
Great. So we're going to try to be really, really practical. There is a theme for this year's World Food Safety Day, and it's about standards, how food standards save lives. But we wanted to start with answering your most burning questions. So do send us your questions. As usual, when we have these lives, if you're watching on Twitter, you can post your question to us using the hashtag AskWHO. If you're watching on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can just put your question in the comment section, and our colleagues are scrolling through those platforms and finding your questions as we move ahead. So I wanted to start, Simone, by setting the picture. Why is food safety an issue? How many people does it affect? I know we have lots of statistics about this. If you guys are curious, you can go to our page for this year's campaign, and my colleagues can drop links to that in. But how do you explain why food safety is really important?
Yeah, Nika, this is a very important question, because many times when we talk about food safety, everybody thinks about the food. But when we talk about food safety, we needed to change our minds and think about people getting sick, about eating contaminated food. So we have some data. It's not a very strong data, because we still lack a lot in terms of surveillance from the countries to really have data about foodborne diseases. So it's underreported, but we do have figures about how many people get sick with food safety per year, for example. But I think one very important topic is how this affects some vulnerable groups, like children under 5, elderly, and people that is immunocompromised, that will be much more affected by those diseases. And one important aspect is that they can kill people. So some people die. A lot of people die because of food safety, unsafe food all over the world. And this is not acceptable, because we're talking about a preventable disease. We can do, everyone has a role. We can take measures to prevent those diseases. So I don't think it's acceptable when we see in the news that someone died because of contaminated food, or children are dying because of eating contaminated food. So it's not acceptable. So we need to understand the role. And as you said, we all are consumers. So independent of our expertise, I am a food safety expert, but I'm also a consumer. My kids are consumers. So we need to take care of what we are eating and what our family is eating.
So before World Food Safety Day, our colleagues have made a lot of content. There's a 1-minute video you can watch on Twitter that summarizes all the things that you as an individual can do. And I'm wondering, Simone, if you can summarize that here as well, because it's a scary topic, but there's a lot being done to make sure food is safe. And generally, most of the time, food is safe. We're trying to draw attention to when it isn't, but most of the time it is safe by the time it reaches you. And there's things you can do at home to make sure it stays safe once it's in your hands, your refrigerator, and on your countertop. So Simone, can you run over what those key things are, what we can do at home to make sure our food stays safe and delicious?
Yeah, thanks, Nika. Yeah, we have the 5 keys, are 5 very simple measures that everyone can adopt. Like, first one is the keep clean. Take care of the hygiene when we are in the place where we are cooking, but also the hand hygiene. So the way we are putting our hands in contact with the food and the place we are handling that food. So this is the first key, it's the keep clean. The other one is to separate raw and cooked food. So this is one of the very important areas where a raw that can have contaminants, a raw food that can have contaminants, if it goes into contact with the food that is ready to eat, so it's that when we transfer this contamination to the food. So this is something that we really needed to take care, is how to make sure we are not mixing utensils, to washing your hands before changing from a raw to a ready-to-eat food, and how to place it then in the refrigerator. It's very important. The third one is to cook truly. We really need, especially when we talk about food from animal source, where we can have some contaminants from the animals that can come through us through the food. So cooking truly is a very important aspect as well. The fourth one is keep food at safe temperatures. There's always a belief that when we cook a food, we need to let it get cooler before putting it in the refrigerator. No, you can't put in the refrigerator. Don't let the food in the environmental temperature, because that will allow bacteria to grow. If you are thawing a frozen fish, for example, don't do that in the room temperature, to keep that in the refrigerator, take the day before, but to make sure that you are not letting bacteria that can cause disease to grow in that food. And the last one is to use safe water and raw materials. So make sure that the water we are using to cook, we're using to wash hands, we're using to wash the utensils, and the food we are using, the raw food we are using to prepare, are safe, are in good quality, fresh, and also healthy. So we needed to add the healthy also to the safe food. In the video, we also tackle a few myths, like people believe.
Let's get to them in a second.
Okay.
You've brought us a lot of information already.
Okay.
So let's talk about the 5 keys to safer food. And those actually apply to us as individuals, but to the whole food system as well. So that's why they're interesting. Simone, what's funny is I've been with WHO since 2008, and I learned about the 5 keys back in 2008. So it's been when I first joined the organization. So it's been a long time, but I'm still guilty of some mistakes. When you were mentioning cooling food on the countertop, 100% I do that. And I don't know why, but I'll cook, for example, rice that I want to put in the freezer, and I'll let it sit until it's not steamy, and then I put it in the fridge. Maybe people don't want to make the refrigerator too tired when it's cooling their food, but you're saying for food safety, it's important to go from hot to cold as quickly as possible. So that's a good one. And then the other day I was at a barbecue, and I noticed we were mixing our utensils for moving the chicken around and moving the grilled vegetables around, and that's a big no-no, right? You were saying separate utensils, and that's what you meant.
Yes, you're right. So having separated utensils for working with the raw meat and the raw vegetables that you not cook. So this is a very important and simple measure that we can take at home.
Yeah. So I encourage everyone to ask us questions, but I haven't gotten to any of your questions yet. So here we go. This is Adriana on LinkedIn. She's writing us from the UK. She says that some people are not able to buy non-organic, or some people have to buy non-organic food. Basically, her question, though, is how to remove pesticides and other contaminants. We sometimes think only chemicals are contaminants, but there's other kinds of contaminants as well. What's the best way to remove these contaminants from our fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, pesticides is a very big issue, and we don't feel anything just after eating unless you eat a big amount. So, and sometimes you don't, so over the time you have the consequences of that. It's not easy depending on the product. It's not easy to remove. So washing well and properly can help to remove part of the pesticides. If possible, to peel the fruit. If you were very unaware of the contamination, you can peel to remove, but in some cases the pesticide can be inside. It's important to know how the rules in the country are for the use of pesticides, and make sure that the products come from a trustable source. Because this is part of what we are talking about for the World Food Safe today, about standards, about how limits are what are the limits for pesticides. So the Codex Alimentarius establishes, and countries follow this, need to follow this rule. So which kind of pesticide can be used for each specific group of vegetables, the dose, and how much time they need to wait for harvest that product are measures that also will make sure that if there is some level of contaminant in the food, this is like in a safe threshold. So this is very important. It doesn't mean that the non-organic is full of pesticides. It also depends on how the food producers are handling and dealing with the pesticides they are using.
So just to summarize, in terms of the specific question that Adriana asked us, how do you wash your fruits and vegetables? Wash them with water, right? We sometimes think we need some other kind of fancy soap or something, but really, if your water is clean, then your water can clean your food, and then peel it if you can as well.
Yeah, and washing with running water, and if possible, to rub a little bit to remove more of the pesticides. And it also will help if there are some bacterial or the biological contaminants, we will also help to remove them.
Okay, I don't see a lot of questions coming our way. So just to remind everyone, if you have a question, you can put it in the comments section. If you're on Twitter, you can use hashtag AskWHO. One of the things you mentioned, Simone, is the Codex. And that has existed for 60 years. It's WHO and the Food and Agriculture Organization together that are sort of the custodians of Codex, which is a food code, which includes standards, guidelines, codes of conduct for the whole food system, I guess, right? From the farmers to the food producers to the vendors who get the food to us. Can you add a little bit more on why Codex is important? Because this year's World Food Safety Day, in fact, focuses on standards, and so Codex is an important part of that.
Yeah, this year we are celebrating the 6th anniversary of Codex Alimentarius, and it's a very important organization. So Codex establishes recommendations, standards, guidelines for the countries, for the member states. And the role of the countries is to adopt those recommendations, to turn them into legislations. And that makes a difference in the country. And sometimes we don't notice that. I can give you an example. For those who are not very young like me, there was a time that when you were buying the food, in the label, you didn't have the nutrition facts, you didn't have expiration date, you didn't have the list of ingredients. And because of a recommendation from Codex, countries started to turn this into legislation. And now you have, in the food, you have nutrition facts, you have a list of ingredients, you have information about the expiration or the best time to consume that product. Is something that comes directly to the consumer. But if we are not working about Codex, if you're not aware about Codex, you don't know that comes from a Codex recommendation. So it's very important that establishes as I mentioned about pesticides, the safe limits, the safe products for each group of products. So there's a lot of work that Codex does to make sure the food we eat is safe. It's a very important organization.
It's one of the things that WHO and other parts of the UN do that might not be visible, but that helps us in our daily lives. So we have a question from Leo on LinkedIn, and he asks, is it right to put very hot food immediately into the fridge? I think that's what you said, Simone, because as you leave it on the counter, as it's cooling down, it's still excellent temperature for bacteria, and we don't want that. So I'm not even going to go to you, Simone, on that one because we heard your answer. Shiva on LinkedIn is asking, what about cooked stale food? Well, hopefully you're not cooking stale food from the night before. So let's say, and I've had this happen in my family as well, somebody's cooked a very big hot pot of chili, and then you don't want to put that giant pot in the fridge, so you've left it overnight the next morning. Should you throw out that whole pot of food? Is it now not safe to eat?
Well, I have two options for you. You can divide this big pot of food in smaller recipients and put in the fridge. That would be the ideal. And this is one of the important topics, because if you have a very hot food in a big pot, it also will take a lot of time to cool down in the refrigerator. So consider putting in a smaller recipients where the change of temperature can be faster. If you didn't put in the refrigerator and you wanted to eat again the next day, make sure you boil that again very well before eating. But it's still a little bit more risky, but could work.
Okay, so those are two things. That evening, to just take that giant pot of food and make it into smaller pots. And then the next day, if you're willing to risk it, cook your food really hot. If you haven't preserved it the right way, cook it really hot and hope you'll kill all the bacteria as you do that. We have Nasir on LinkedIn who's asking, who's saying, I just want to know whether food safety standards vary between the developed world and developing world. And what's your view? This is a separate question. What's your view on food insecurity? But let's start first. Do we recommend different standards for richer countries and poorer countries?
No, the standards are the same. And this is an important aspect. So it's really to have harmonization. That will not only be beneficial for food safety, but it also will be important to facilitate trade of food. And that is also linked with the food security aspect. So one of the ways to make sure we have food available everywhere is we have to do that internationally trading, because some countries cannot produce all the food they need, so they need to buy from other countries. Having an international standard that everyone will apply the same standard will facilitate this trade of food, and making sure that this food is also safe.
And then can we touch on what food security is versus food safety? The words seem similar, but they're different concepts.
Yeah, this is a very important topic, and it also gives a lot of confusion when you do translation of the documents, because normally the translation can give also this mixture. Food security has to do with the access to safe and healthy food. And food safety has to be with the food not being the cause of contamination or not being the cause of disease to human. When we talk about food security, food safety is an important part. We can't have food security if we don't have a food safety. But food security has to do with access, with the programs for zero hunger, for example, to improve nutrition status in children in many underdeveloped, in low-income countries where you need to have better access to food. So this is food security. But this food needs to be safe as well.
Okay, so food security means making sure there's enough food for people to eat, enough nutritious food for people to eat. And food safety is making sure that food stays safe to eat. It's still healthy for you to eat. It doesn't have any contamination. We have a question from Wudad on LinkedIn, and I must say we're getting lots of good questions on LinkedIn. Are you supposed to wash chicken?
No, definitely no.
Tell Wudad why we're not supposed to wash chicken or other meat.
Yes, and this is also one of the tips included in the 1-minute video that we are launching today. When you wash chicken or other meat, what you do is that you spread contaminants that can be in the surface of the meat in your hands or in the surfaces around where you were preparing the chicken. So don't do that. Just cook that very well, and that make sure that you kill all the potential contaminants that will be in the chicken. And after handling the chicken, wash well your hand and all the utensils that touched on the chicken, please.
We have a lot of questions. We have Rania, we have, let me just scroll through here. Another one, Amit, Vatsala. They're basically asking what's the best way to store food. So we've already said store food in the refrigerator, but they're asking what kind of containers. Is there a way for storing food to keep food better for longer? So it's basically about once you have your food, you've put it in the refrigerator, How long can you keep it there? They're a little bit vague, but people mostly are asking about how to keep food safe once you've stored it properly.
Yeah. So it always depends on the food, for sure. Foods that have higher content of fat you may not have a problem with contamination, but you feel the smell if it's long time in the refrigerator, even that. But talking about contamination, when you put the food in the refrigerator, it doesn't mean that bacteria that can be in the food will not grow, but will grow slower. So I would say a safe period would be maximum 5 days. So if you have a leftover or a food that you prepared but you don't eat that moment, you put in the refrigerator, make sure that you consume that in this period of maximum 5 days. Don't let more. For some products, you will start to feel, even in the refrigerator, we start to feel different changes in the quality, in the sensorial characteristics of the food. But from the contamination aspect, 5 days would be a maximum in the refrigerator.
Okay.
In the freezer, depending of the food, can be up to 3 months, but it always depends on the will affect much more the quality.
Okay, so a few months, and that answers a question we had from Grace on LinkedIn from Dubai. She was asking, how long can you keep and store food in the freezer? So that was a few months. Sometimes as well, it may still be safe, but it doesn't look nice anymore. You know, if your food starts to get those ice crystals on it or starts to go white in parts, maybe it's still safe, but you may not want to consume it. Jason on LinkedIn is asking, how do you deal where you're not sure, where the source isn't trustworthy? And you touched on that a little bit when you're answering the question from Adriana when she was asking about organic food. So, I mean, I'm wondering if there's much the consumer can do to know whether food is safe, or whether it's really more about governments and food producers making sure the food is safe before it reaches you. So, but what can you do as an individual to figure out whether the others have done their job, basically?
Yeah, I think it's really important as consumer to, if you don't have this information, take a look in the food, see how it's packaged, see if it looks fresh or not. So and then if you bring home, make sure you handle it with hygiene and cooking properly. So you can make your own, you can take your own actions at home. But when choosing the food, look for fresh food. If it's for example, canned food, if the can is not damaged, if it's a plastic bag, if it's not damaged as well, if it's not open. So make sure that you find, even if you don't know the source, take a look. Trust your feeling as a consumer about the freshness and the integrity of that product.
Okay. This next question leads on, actually. It's a little bit related. So this is Oy Sagbay on LinkedIn, who says that in Africa, local fruits are easily available and accessible. How can you tell whether food is healthy for consumption? You talked about the packaging, but can you look at a fruit and know if it's dirty in some way? Is there a way of knowing? And let's expand this beyond fruit as well. Food you've left out on the counter. Can you tell by look and by smell whether food is still safe to eat?
Yeah. When unfortunately the pathogens, bacteria that can cause foodborne diseases, normally they don't change the aspect of the food. So you will not be able to see and say, well, this fruit is contaminated with this bacteria or X bacteria. So you can't see that. When the food starts to change the characteristics, it's because some chemical changes, because it's too much time, it's not fresh anymore. So then you feel the smell is different, the texture is different. So then you know that's not good to eat. But in terms of bacterial contaminants, unfortunately, you can't see. So that's why if you're not sure if that fruit is contaminated or not, wash it very well before eating, and make sure you were eating a fresh fruit instead of old one that had changed its characteristics.
For those of you who really want to nerd out and learn even more about safety standards and these issues we've talked about, WHO is doing a series of talks on food. Simone, can you tell us a little bit more? Before this started, you mentioned that you had 2 and there's 2 more to come. Can you give people a few more details on that?
Yeah, sure. During this week, because of the World Food Safety Day, we are organizing a series of health talks to discuss different aspects on food safety. We had one related to the impact of foodborne diseases. We had one yesterday about the new global strategy for food safety that was adopted last year. Both are recorded and are available on in the webpage of the Health Talks, where you can access through the QR code. So the records are there, so you can still watch even that you couldn't attend yesterday and the day before. But for tomorrow and Friday, we will have other 2 health talks. Tomorrow we will talk about food standards with a very great group of experts to talk about what food standards mean for us. And then on Friday, we will have another one on the use of whole genome sequencing. That became very popular after COVID pandemic, but that is also a very helpful tool to do the surveillance of foodborne diseases. So we will have also these 2 topics. And if you can't attend on that time, if the time is not good for you, depending on your time zone, you still can register and then you can watch the recording sessions. But if you attend online, you can have the chance to make questions and to interact with the experts.
Right. So we've put the QR code right here so that you can scan that and get information, or just go to the WHO website. We've put World Food Safety Day in prominence, so you should be able to find it. So still more questions, really a lot about how to preserve food. Let me see this one. It's getting a little bit specific, how to prepare 1 week's worth of food in the microwave and so on. So maybe I'll go to another broader question. I know you did a live like this last year, and we're touching on slightly different things this year. Some people are asking the same question, and then there's a little bit of interest in some new topics. You mentioned as well that one of the focuses, one of the issues people are more and more interested in is what's the difference between a best before date and an expiration date on your food. You mentioned packaging earlier as well. So what's the difference between best before and expiration date? Give us a little summary of that.
Yeah, best before is related to the quality of the product. It means that the product can be safe, can still be safe after that date, but it means that the quality, the flavor, the texture may not be the same. So the best before, it's much more, for example, for dry foods or frozen foods that there's not a risk of contamination, but changes in terms of quality. When you talk about best by or expiration date, it means that after that date, it's not guaranteed that the product is safe. So you should not consume after that date. It still can look good, but can be contaminated. So this is a very important difference. When you say best before, it means that you still can consume, taking the risk. It doesn't mean that it's not 100% not contaminated, but the main changes will be in the quality.
Okay, thank you. For the one versus the other. I'm sorry, I'm typing here.
No problem. I can give you an example of best before, for example, for ice cream. So it still can be good in terms of safety, but then it's what you mentioned. It started to have some ice crystals. It's changed the texture, the texture is different, but it still can be safe. But the quality changes a lot.
Okay, that's an important difference. So I was just checking your questions here, and that's why I was lightly distracted. So we're going to wrap up soon, but I think we have time for one more question. This is from Savinaka or Savinatsa on LinkedIn, who's asking, what are some precautionary measures we can take every day to ensure food is safe? This is slightly different, her question, especially when you're reliant on takeout food, so ordering food in from restaurants. How does do the precautions we need to take change slightly?
Yeah, so I think here we have two situations. One is takeout from a restaurant, where it's a formal food establishment, where you know that they need to follow some rules, that they are inspected. They normally in the countries, food handlers needed to be trained. So there you have a little bit of a better control on what is produced there. But when you take out food, make sure you go directly to your house and then you put the food in the refrigerator. Don't be doing a lot of things around with the food in the package in your car or in your bike or in your bag, waiting too many hours to put in the refrigerator. So is that the same case of don't let the food in temperature abuse, as we say. But I think also after pandemic, it started a lot of those informal establishments that sell food online. So then it's more complicated because the food can be really good, can be well done, but we don't know. We don't have information. It's not a formal establishment. So you need really to make sure that that food you're buying is safe, and it's not easy because you don't know where it's being produced, in which conditions it's being produced. But the online sales allows for that nowadays, and we need to be very cautious from where we order food online.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do as a consumer as well. So it goes back to the system. The system needs to be doing the right things to protect us. And I said that was the last question, but I'm going to sneak in one more. This is from SOS or SOS Peter. And he says, who are those responsible for food safety in the food chain? And that links back to the theme this year, which was food standards save lives. So if you can just touch on that, who are the various entities who are responsible for making sure that from the farm to our plate, the food stays as safe as possible?
Yeah, everyone is responsible. So when we talk about the primary productions, farmers are responsible. We talked about pesticides. They are responsible for using the allowed pesticide. They are responsible for making sure the dose they are using are the right one, responsible for waiting that X days for harvest according to the pesticide they are using. Then you have the transportists, so they are responsible for making sure that the vehicle was not contaminated, was not, for example, used to transport products that are not food. We have a few cases of contamination in this situation. Vendors are responsible for making sure the products are well maintained and exposed. Consumers are responsible choosing the best food, making sure they go home, they wash, they put in the refrigerator, they cook it truly, they keep hygiene. Industries are responsible for applying the rules, the standards in the production. Governments are responsible for making the food control system working and making sure everything is working. So it's everyone's responsibility. It's not only one agency. It's not only one minister. It's all the areas. It's a multi-sectoral approach that we needed to have, and multi-stakeholder approach to make sure food is safe.
So basically, anyone who has food in their possession at any point along the chain has a role to play. And then those who oversee those sectors of our economies also have a role to play, essentially. So as you say, everyone in some way has a role to play. So I'm going to wrap up now by saying who's joined us today or where you have joined us from. We have Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, Qatar, the UK, South Africa, Australia, Ghana, Malawi, India, Papua New Guinea, Cameroon, Algeria, Pakistan, Cambodia, among others. So thank you very much, Dr. Simone Morais Razel, for being with us today, for telling us about food safety. Thank you for the fact that there's a World Food Safety Day that gives us an opportunity to talk about this. Much more information is available on our social media platforms. We have a cute video that's already out today on the WHO website, and the talks that Simone mentioned as well. Simone, any last things you want to suggest people keep in mind if they're going to remember one thing from you today? What would you like that to be?
Okay, first I would like to mention that the video that we launched is available in the 6 UN languages. So we will find it with subtitles in Chinese, Arabic, Russian, Spanish, French, and English. So please share. It's very simple tips. What I would just say is the message I have for today is that please make sure that you as consumer take the proper actions. If it's not safe, it's not food, and that the food safety is important for our health. It's not because we wanted to eat delicious food, but also make sure that this food is healthy and is not making us sick.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. We really love that you're interested, that you have questions, that you're chatting with each other as well. See you next